She came in for a routine checkup, but when the CEO doctor saw her triplets, his hands trembled. Those were the children he thought would never exist. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. The third pregnancy test stared back at Jessica Reynolds, its pink lines unwavering in their certainty. Her trembling hands gripped the small plastic stick as if it might somehow change its verdict if she held it long enough. 24 years old, newly graduated as a nurse, and now pregnant. The cramped bathroom of her Dorchester apartment felt suddenly airless. Through the small window, October's crisp air carried the sound of distant traffic and the rustle of fallen leaves. Boston was embracing autumn, the Massachusetts streets painted in vibrant oranges and reds, a stark contrast to the cold dread pooling in Jessica's stomach. She closed her eyes, leaning against the chipped bathroom sink. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to remember how it all began 8 months ago at Massachusetts General Hospital. It had been near the end of her final rotation. Jessica was checking IV lines when Dr. Richard Harrington strode into the neurology ward, white coat impeccably pressed, confidence radiating from him like heat. At 31, he was already being whispered about as the hospital's rising star. Brilliant hands, Harvard pedigree, and family connections that stretched back generations in Boston medical circles. "Reynolds, right?" he'd said, surprising her by knowing her name. "Your charting is impeccable. Most nursing students can't distinguish between mild aphasia and simple confusion." His smile had felt like a gift, his attention intoxicating. When he'd asked her to review patient files after her shift, she'd stayed 2 hours past her scheduled time. The coffee he'd brought her was the first of many subtle gestures that evolved into clandestine meetings in on-call rooms, discreet dinners at restaurants far from hospital circles, and occasional weekends at his Beacon Hill apartment when his schedule allowed. Never introductions to friends, never family gatherings, always with the whispered promise, "When the timing is right." Jessica splashed cold water on her face, returning to her grim present. She'd called in sick to her temporary clinic job, left a cryptic message for Richard. "Need to talk urgently." Now she was expected at his apartment, a rare daylight visit to the sleek duplex she'd only seen in evening shadows. 2 hours later, Jessica stood at the massive windows of Richard's Beacon Hill apartment, staring at the Charles River and the Cambridge skyline beyond. The place was a study in minimalist luxury, all clean lines, leather, glass, and original artwork. Everything about it screamed success and planning. Everything about it now felt alien to her. When the door opened, Jessica turned. Richard entered, his expression already guarded. She had never before realized how quickly he could shift from the warm, charming man who whispered endearments in her ear to this cool, analytical stranger. "Your message sounded ominous," he said, not moving to embrace her. He remained by the entryway as if preparing for a quick exit from his own home. "Everything okay?" Jessica took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The silence stretched between them, expanding to fill every corner of the spacious apartment. Richard's face remained perfectly still, professionally composed as if she'd presented him with an interesting but troubling lab result. "And there's more," she continued, her voice smaller now. "I saw Dr. Winters yesterday. It's triplets." Richard walked slowly to the sleek bar near the dining area, selecting a crystal tumbler and pouring himself 2 fingers of amber liquid. His movements were deliberate, almost surgical in their precision. He didn't offer her a drink. "Triplets," he finally said, the word hanging in the air like a diagnosis. "That's quite unexpected." Jessica waited for more. Shock, fear, perhaps even a sliver of excitement buried beneath the surprise. It didn't come. "Richard, I know this isn't what we planned, but triplets are completely unacceptable," he cut in, his voice clinically detached. He took a measured sip of his whiskey, studying her over the rim of the glass. "I'm being named chief resident next month. I have 3 papers to publish this semester and the Harrington board to impress." The coldness of his tone froze Jessica where she stood. This wasn't the response of a shocked man. This was calculated assessment. "Richard, I didn't plan this either, but we could—" "We?" His eyebrow arched with practiced precision. "There is no we, Jessica." His tone carried the same condescending patience he used with confused patients. "You've been a pleasant distraction, but you were never part of the plan." Each word landed like a physical blow. Jessica remained rooted to the spot as Richard continued. "Triplets?" He laughed without humor. "Do you have any concept of what that would do to my career? To my reputation? The Harrington name has stood for medical excellence for 3 generations. I can't have this complication." Jessica watched in stunned silence as he walked to the mahogany desk in the corner and pulled out a checkbook. The leather cover bore the embossed Harrington family crest. "You have options," he continued, meticulously filling out a check, his handwriting as perfect as his surgical stitches. "Use this however you see fit. Discreet clinics, adoption arrangements, not my concern." Silent tears slid down Jessica's face as he pushed the paper across the glass coffee table. $10,000. The price he placed on her future, on the lives growing inside her. "Richard, I thought we—" "Be realistic, Jessica." His voice sharpened. "You're a newly graduated nurse from a state school with a temporary contract. I'm a Harrington from Harvard Medical. My family has a wing named after them at Mass General." He straightened his Italian silk tie. "You would never be enough for someone like me, much less to raise children in the world I've built." The brutal efficiency of his dismissal left Jessica breathless. In 8 months, she had never seen this version of Richard, or perhaps she had simply refused to see the signs of his true character. "I trusted you," she whispered. "That was your mistake, not mine." He glanced at his watch. "I have a department meeting in 40 minutes. I trust you can see yourself out." Jessica stared at the check on the table, then at the man who had just reduced their relationship to a simple transaction. With shaking fingers, she picked up the check, crumpling it in her fist. "Keep your money," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'll figure this out on my own." Richard sighed, as if dealing with a particularly stubborn patient. "Don't be dramatic, Jessica. You'll need it. Your contract at the hospital ends next week, and no one's going to hire a visibly pregnant nurse, much less one carrying triplets." The casual cruelty of his assessment sliced through her last defenses. He had known about her contract ending, had probably calculated exactly when to end things. That night, Jessica descended the Beacon Hill steps like a sleepwalker, the crumpled check stuffed into her coat pocket. The October wind cut through her thin jacket as she made her way to the subway station, her mind still struggling to process the complete collapse of what she had believed was love. On the crowded Red Line train back to Dorchester, 2 devastating realities collided violently in Jessica's mind. She was unemployed after her temporary hospital contract expired, pregnant with triplets, and completely alone. The fluorescent lights of the subway car seemed to highlight every worry line on her face, every thread in her worn coat, all the visible signs of the gap between her world and Richard's. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of desperation. Jessica took 2 jobs, receptionist at a walk-in clinic during the day and waitress at night. Richard's check remained untouched in her drawer, a symbol of everything she refused to accept. Her belly grew while her savings dwindled. When her landlord sold the small apartment building and she received an eviction notice, Jessica faced the humiliation of having nowhere to turn, except one person. "You have more potential than you realize, Jessica," said Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, her former nursing professor, offering the guest room in her Cambridge home. Eleanor's kind eyes held no judgment as Jessica explained her situation, only practical concern and unexpected warmth. "And these babies deserve a chance." It was Eleanor who recognized the first warning signs of preeclampsia in Jessica's 6th month. It was Eleanor who held her hand during the emergency C-section as three tiny boys, Alex, Ethan, and Ryan, were rushed to the NICU, fighting for their lives. And it was Eleanor who sat beside Jessica during those critical first weeks, watching three incubators containing minuscule versions of Richard Harrington. One night, exhausted after pumping breast milk for her still hospitalized sons, Jessica found Eleanor reviewing research papers at the kitchen table. "It's a new neurological monitoring device," Eleanor explained, showing Jessica the diagrams. "It could be revolutionary, but it lacks funding and a team that understands both patient care and technology." Jessica studied the diagrams while an idea began forming in her mind. What if we could miniaturize this? Make it less invasive? Eleanor looked at the young mother with renewed interest. "You always had exceptional grades in biophysics." On the morning Jessica finally brought the triplets home, she stood before the bathroom mirror while three tiny boys slept in borrowed cribs. Her reflection showed a woman changed, thinner, exhausted, but with a steely determination in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Richard Harrington said I would never be enough," she whispered to her reflection. "Well, I'm going to show him and the world what enough really means." 15 years later, when Jessica Reynolds would step onto the stage to accept Innovator of the Year award in front of the global medical elite, Richard Harrington would understand the true meaning of enough, but it would be far too late. Jessica's words to her reflection lingered in the steam-fogged bathroom mirror. 15 years seemed an eternity away. Right now, survival was measured in hours, feedings, and the precious moments when all three boys breathed easily at once. The cardboard boxes stacked in Eleanor's guest room contained everything Jessica owned. Not much for a 24-year-old. Some clothes, nursing textbooks, a few framed photos, and three tiny onesies she'd purchased before the boys arrived so suddenly. Moving into her former professor's Cambridge home felt both like rescue and defeat. "Second shelf in the fridge is yours," Eleanor called from the hallway, passing by with an armful of freshly laundered baby blankets. "And I've set up the baby monitor to reach both bedrooms." Jessica nodded gratefully, still adjusting to the reality that her life now revolved around three miniature humans, each weighing less than 5 pounds. The premature birth at 28 weeks had been terrifying, alarms blaring, doctors shouting statistics, and Jessica herself sliding in and out of consciousness as her blood pressure spiked dangerously. 2 weeks later, she sat in a hospital chair for her first ultrasound follow-up. The technician moved the wand carefully over her still tender abdomen. 3 distinct heartbeats, the technician confirmed, pointing to the fluttering pulses on the screen. "They're fighters, these little ones." Jessica stared at the monitor, the reality of triplets solidifying in ways that mere knowledge could never accomplish. 3 separate lives, 3 distinct futures, all depending entirely on her. The magnitude of responsibility crashed over her like a physical wave. "They're so tiny," she whispered. "But growing stronger every day," the technician reassured her. "Multiple births are always challenging, but these boys are making remarkable progress." Remarkable progress required remarkable sacrifice. By the time Jessica healed enough to work again, her savings had dwindled to almost nothing. Eleanor had been beyond generous, but Jessica refused to become a burden. She accepted a receptionist position at a small medical clinic 15 minutes from Eleanor's house, working from 8 to 4 daily. "Ms. Reynolds, there's a stack of insurance forms that need processing by lunch," her supervisor said one morning, dropping a thick pile of papers on her desk. Jessica nodded, hiding a wave of nausea behind a professional smile. The pregnancy might be over, but her body was still recovering while producing milk for 3 hungry infants. During lunch breaks, she would rush to a supply closet with her breast pump, sitting on an overturned bucket while connected to the whirring machine. 15 minutes to pump, 5 minutes to eat the sandwich she'd packed, then back to the reception desk with milk carefully stored in the break room refrigerator. Evenings brought a second job, waitressing at a busy restaurant 3 blocks away. Her feet swelled painfully in the required black shoes, each step a reminder of her still-healing body. "Table 7 wants another round," called the bartender as Jessica balanced a tray of entrees. She nodded, forcing another smile for the business executives who barely looked at her face as she delivered their steaks and cocktails. The irony wasn't lost on her. Serving expensive meals she couldn't afford to men in expensive suits, just like the one Richard wore when he offered her a check to erase their children. At home, she counted coins at Eleanor's kitchen table while her former professor graded papers nearby. The pile of quarters, dimes, and nickels represented tomorrow's bus fare and half of next week's diapers. "You're short again," Eleanor observed quietly, pushing a $20 bill across the table. "For the prenatal vitamins. You're still supposed to be taking them while nursing." Jessica's pride warred with necessity. "I'll pay you back," she promised, accepting the money with trembling fingers. "You can pay me back by taking care of yourself," Eleanor replied firmly. "Those boys need you healthy." Those boys were growing stronger in the NICU, but each day brought new worries. Alex, the largest at 3 pounds 4 ounces, had developed a slight heart murmur. Ethan struggled with jaundice under the blue lights. Ryan, the smallest, had trouble regulating his body temperature. Jessica spent every free moment at the hospital, often arriving in her waitress uniform after closing shift, sitting beside the incubators until the early morning hours. She learned to navigate the beeping monitors, understand oxygen saturation levels, and interpret the subtle signals of distress in infants too small to cry properly. 6 weeks after the birth, Eleanor found Jessica collapsed in the bathroom, blood pressure skyrocketing again from exhaustion and stress. "This stops now," Eleanor said firmly as she helped Jessica to bed. "You're working yourself into the ground." "I don't have a choice," Jessica whispered, her voice breaking. "The medical bills keep coming and the boys need their mother alive," Eleanor interrupted, checking Jessica's pulse with practiced precision. "I'm calling Dr. Winters. You're showing signs of postpartum hypertension." The ambulance lights flashed red and blue against the bedroom curtains 20 minutes later. Jessica drifted in and out of consciousness as paramedics secured her on the stretcher, Eleanor's voice steady as she provided medical history. "BP 170/100, patient has history of preeclampsia, emergency C-section 6 weeks ago, triplets." The hospital room was a blur of faces and voices. Jessica caught phrases through the fog. Severe exhaustion, postpartum complications, at risk for stroke. When she fully regained consciousness, Eleanor sat beside her bed, gray hair pulled back severely, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed Jessica's chart. "They're keeping you 48 hours, Eleanor stated, her tone allowing no argument. "I've called both your jobs. The clinic understands. The restaurant less so, but they'll manage." "I can't lose those jobs," Jessica protested weakly. "You can't care for 3 babies if you're dead," Eleanor countered bluntly. "We'll figure something out." During those 48 hours, Jessica slept more than she had in weeks. Between blood pressure checks and medication adjustments, she found herself staring at the ceiling, thinking about the 3 tiny lives waiting for her. What kind of future could she provide them? How would she answer when they eventually asked about their father? On the evening before her discharge, Eleanor arrived with news that the NICU nurse had called. Ryan had developed an irregular heartbeat and might need a minor surgical procedure. "I need to be there," Jessica said, already reaching for her clothes. "You will be," Eleanor assured her. "But first, I want to show you something." Eleanor opened her laptop, pulling up a research document with diagrams and charts. "This is the project I've been working on, a new type of neurological monitoring device. Less invasive, more accurate. The problem is, current versions are bulky, uncomfortable for patients, and frankly, the data transmission isn't reliable." Jessica studied the diagrams while Ryan's condition hovered in her thoughts. "The sensor placement seems inefficient," she noted absently, "and the transmission nodes are too far from the collection points." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's exactly the problem. The engineering team can't seem to solve it. If you miniaturize this component, Jessica pointed to a bulky receiver, and move the sensor array to follow the nerve pathway instead of crossing it, you might get cleaner signals. A slow smile spread across Eleanor's face. Your biophysics professor always said you had an intuitive understanding of neural transmission that most nursing students lack. Jessica shrugged. I just see patterns easily. 3 days later, Ryan underwent his procedure. Successful but terrifying for Jessica, who watched through the observation window as doctors worked on her smallest son. During the long hours in the waiting room, she sketched improvements to Eleanor's monitoring device on the back of hospital forms, the work providing distraction from her fear. The weeks blurred together. Clinic work, pumping milk, hospital visits, occasional shifts at the restaurant when Eleanor could watch the baby's monitors. Jessica learned to function on 3 hours of sleep, catching naps in hospital chairs between feeding sessions. After 87 days in the NICU, the triplets were finally cleared to go home, still tiny but resilient, their personalities already emerging. Alex, the largest, watched everything with alert eyes. Ethan made the most sounds, responding to voices with tiny coos. Ryan, the smallest fighter, gripped Jessica's finger with surprising strength whenever she held him. On the morning she brought them home, Jessica arranged 3 borrowed cribs in Eleanor's guest room, now transformed with donated baby supplies. The boys slept peacefully, unaware of the momentous transition or the tears sliding down their mother's cheeks as she watched them breathe. Jessica slipped into the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. The mirror reflected someone she barely recognized, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, but with a fierce determination that had replaced her former softness. Richard Harrington said I would never be enough, she whispered to her reflection. Well, I'm going to show him and the world what enough really means. That evening, while the boys slept, Jessica found Eleanor reviewing research files at the kitchen table. The diagrams Jessica had sketched in the hospital waiting room were now professionally rendered. My department head was impressed with your modifications, Eleanor said casually. Said they solved problems the engineering team had been struggling with for months. Jessica smiled tiredly, warming a bottle for Ryan's midnight feeding. Just practical solutions from someone who understands patient care. Eleanor watched her former student carefully. There's research funding available. Not much, but enough to develop a prototype. With your permission, I'd like to submit your designs. Jessica paused, bottle halfway to the warmer. You're serious? Deadly serious. The medical technology field needs people who understand both the science and the human elements. People like you. For the first time in months, Jessica felt something beyond exhaustion and worry, a flicker of possibility, of a future beyond survival mode. She couldn't know then that the sketches made during her son's surgery would become the foundation of a technological revolution. She couldn't foresee that the nights without sleep designing medical devices while her children fought for life would be the building blocks of a technological empire that would one day make Richard Harrington seem insignificant. The sketches would become more than just ideas on paper. 3 months after the triplets were born, they finally came home. Jessica had transformed Eleanor's guest room into a nursery with borrowed cribs, donated baby clothes, and a small desk where she could study while watching over her sons. The transition from hospital to home wasn't seamless. It meant no more nurses, no more monitors, just Jessica responsible for every breath, feeding, and cry of 3 fragile infants. They're so quiet when they sleep, Jessica whispered, standing in the doorway with Eleanor on that first night. The 3 tiny bodies barely made indentations in their cribs. Don't get used to it, Eleanor smiled, handing Jessica a cup of tea. Once they discover their lungs properly, you'll miss these silent moments. The routine was exhausting. Alex needed feeding every 2 hours, while Ethan and Ryan required smaller, more frequent feedings. Their different schedules meant Jessica rarely slept more than 45 minutes at a stretch. She maintained a detailed log of each boy's intake, output, and development, determined to give them the best possible start despite their premature birth. On their 1-month anniversary at home, Jessica sat cross-legged on the floor between the cribs, surrounded by textbooks and engineering journals. Eleanor had enrolled her in a biophysics extension course at the local community college, classes Jessica attended online during rare, quiet moments. 6 pounds, 2 ounces, Jessica noted, recording Alex's weight in her journal. Each gram gained felt like a personal victory. And Ethan's jaundice is finally clearing. Jessica transferred Ryan to her shoulder, patting his back gently while reviewing notes on sensor technology. His tiny fingers curled against her neck as she highlighted passages about neural monitoring systems. Unlike his brothers, Ryan still struggled with breathing patterns, requiring constant vigilance. Days blurred into weeks. Jessica mastered the art of nursing 2 babies simultaneously while reading textbooks propped on pillows. She learned to type one-handed while holding a bottle with the other. Sleep became a luxury, meals often forgotten until Eleanor forced a plate into her hands. "You won't help them by collapsing," Eleanor reminded her frequently. "Self-care isn't selfishness." When the triplets were 4 months old, still small for their age but growing steadily, Jessica experienced her first moment of pure, unexpected joy. She was changing Alex's diaper while making soothing sounds, and he responded with a bright, toothless laugh. The sound startled her, bringing instant tears. Moments later, Ethan joined with his own gurgling chuckle, and even Ryan, the smallest and most serious, made a whispering approximation of laughter. "Did you hear that?" Jessica called to Eleanor, who was preparing bottles in the kitchen. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, smiling at the scene of Jessica surrounded by 3 wiggling infants. That's the sound of things getting better, one day at a time. That night, after the boys were finally asleep, Eleanor found Jessica unconscious at the desk, her face pressed against a textbook, pencil still in hand. Gently shaking her awake, Eleanor noticed the complex diagrams Jessica had been sketching in the margins of her notes. "You've been modifying my design again," Eleanor observed, examining the intricate changes to the neural monitoring system. Jessica blinked sleepily. "The current sensors require too much direct contact. I've been thinking about non-invasive alternatives, something that could monitor without disrupting nerve function." Eleanor studied the sketches with growing interest. "These are remarkably innovative. Have you considered presenting these ideas formally?" Jessica laughed tiredly, glancing at the 3 cribs. "When, exactly? Between feedings at 3 and 5 a.m.? The next morning, Jessica woke to find Eleanor had set up a proper drafting table in the corner of the living room, complete with proper technical pens and graph paper. "The babies sleep in bursts of 20 minutes, Eleanor said, handing Jessica her first cup of coffee. "That's 20 minutes at a time to work on something that could change lives, including yours." Over the following weeks, Jessica established a new pattern. Between feedings, diaper changes, and the minimal sleep her body required to function, she worked on refining her neural monitoring concept. Her nursing background provided insights into patient comfort that most engineers overlooked, while her natural aptitude for biophysics guided the technical innovations. When the triplets reached 6 months, Jessica had produced a comprehensive design for a non-invasive neural monitoring system. Eleanor, impressed by the work's sophistication, arranged a meeting with a colleague from the engineering department. "This is remarkably elegant," Professor Klein said, examining Jessica's diagrams. "Particularly this sensor array configuration. Who's your engineering partner on this?" "There isn't one," Eleanor explained. "Jessica developed this independently." Professor Klein looked at Jessica with newfound respect. "With your permission, I'd like to include this in an upcoming innovation showcase at MIT. It's primarily for students and faculty, but occasionally attracts industry attention." Jessica glanced at Eleanor uncertainly. "The boys? I'll watch them," Eleanor promised. "This is too important to pass up." The MIT Innovation Showcase fell on the triplets' 9-month milestone. Jessica spent the morning weighing and measuring each boy, recording their progress in the journal that had become a detailed chronicle of their development. All three had nearly doubled their birth weights, with even Ryan catching up to his brothers. 9 months, Jessica whispered, kissing each downy head. You've been in the world as long as you were inside me. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, holding a simple but professional-looking navy dress. I picked this up yesterday. The showcase starts in 3 hours. Jessica stroked the fabric uncertainly. I haven't worn anything but sweatpants in months. It's time, Eleanor said simply. The MIT auditorium buzzed with academics, students, and industry representatives. Jessica stood nervously beside her display board, wearing the borrowed dress and a pair of Eleanor's low heels. Her poster, titled Non-Invasive Neural Monitoring: A Patient-Centered Approach, had attracted minimal attention during the first hour. Most people gravitate toward the robotics demonstrations, Professor Klein explained, stopping by her station. Don't be discouraged. As the afternoon progressed, a small group of medical technology professionals gathered around Jessica's presentation. Her explanation was clear, rooted in practical experience and patient needs. She described problems with current monitoring systems she'd observed in the NICU, explaining how her design addressed those shortcomings. The key innovation is this sensor array, she explained, pointing to her diagram. Instead of penetrating tissue, it reads neural impulses through a specialized conductive gel layer. A man in a charcoal suit stepped forward. What about signal degradation? Non-invasive methods typically sacrifice accuracy. Jessica smiled, anticipating the question. That's where this distributed processing system comes in. Instead of relying on a single collection point, we use multiple microsensors working in concert, each compensating for environmental interference. By the showcase's end, Jessica had collected 5 business cards and an invitation to apply for a small innovation grant. The most promising contact came from David Levinson, representing a medical technology incubator. We provide seed funding and mentorship for promising medical innovations, he explained, examining her designs carefully. This has potential, particularly for neonatal applications. Would you consider a formal presentation to our investment committee? Jessica's heart raced. I would need to prepare more comprehensive documentation. Of course, Levinson nodded. We could schedule something in 3 weeks? That evening, Jessica returned to Eleanor's house physically exhausted but mentally energized. The triplets were already asleep, their little chests rising and falling in perfect synchronicity. They didn't even notice I was gone, she whispered, a mixture of relief and maternal guilt in her voice. But they'll notice the difference you make in the world, Eleanor replied. What happened after I left? Jessica showed her Levinson's card. He wants a formal presentation. If they like it, there might be seed funding. Enough to start something real, Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Over the next 3 weeks, Jessica worked whenever the triplets slept, refining her designs and preparing financial projections. Eleanor's basement became a makeshift office, with technical diagrams taped to the walls and prototype sketches scattered across folding tables. The night before her presentation, Jessica found herself unable to sleep despite bone-deep exhaustion. She stood in the nursery doorway, watching her sons, now crawling, babbling, developing distinct personalities. Alex was already showing signs of analytical thinking, stacking blocks methodically. Ethan vocalized constantly, as if practicing for future conversations. Ryan, still smaller but determined, mastered fine motor skills before his brothers. I'm doing this for you, she whispered to their sleeping forms, to build something that matters. Jessica's presentation to the investment committee was scheduled for 2 p.m. the following day. Eleanor had arranged to take the afternoon off to watch the triplets. Jessica wore the navy dress again, now paired with shoes she'd found at a consignment shop and a portfolio containing her life's new purpose. The incubator's offices occupied a renovated industrial space in Cambridge. Jessica sat in the waiting area, rehearsing her talking points while observing other entrepreneurs, mostly men in expensive suits with polished presentations and Ivy League pedigrees. For a moment, Richard's voice echoed in her mind. "You would never be enough for someone like me." When her name was called, Jessica squared her shoulders and entered the conference room. 5 investors sat around a polished table, Levinson among them. "Ms. Reynolds," he began, "tell us about your neural monitoring innovation." Jessica opened her portfolio, revealing diagrams far more sophisticated than those she'd presented at MIT. "This system represents a fundamental shift in how we monitor neurological activity in vulnerable patients." For 20 minutes, she spoke with quiet authority born from both technical knowledge and lived experience. She explained manufacturing costs, market potential, and clinical applications. When questions came, she answered with precision and confidence. "Why this particular innovation?" asked the only woman on the panel. "What's your personal connection?" Jessica hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My triplet sons were born prematurely last year. I watched them struggling in the NICU, connected to monitoring equipment that caused them pain and yielded inconsistent data. I believed there had to be a better way, for them and for millions of other patients." The committee exchanged glances. Levinson leaned forward. "Ms. Reynolds, your technical solution is impressive, but it's your perspective as both a healthcare professional and a parent that gives this project unique value. We'd like to offer you initial funding of $50,000 to develop a working prototype." That evening, Jessica sat at Eleanor's kitchen table staring at the contract before her. The seed funding wasn't enormous, but it was real, a tangible belief in her idea and abilities. "I need to register a company name," she realized aloud. Eleanor smiled. "Any ideas?" Jessica thought of her sons, of the bridges her technology would build between patients and effective care. "Health Bridge," she said with certainty, "and I want the boys' initials in the registration number." As she signed the paperwork, Jessica couldn't know that the small technology incubator's $50,000 investment would one day be worth millions. She couldn't foresee that the executive from Johnson & Johnson who would eventually see her first product would circle her name and write a note. "Find this woman. I want this technology." The $50,000 check from the medical technology incubator transformed into a framed certificate hanging on the wall of Jessica's new reality. HealthBridge existed now, not just as an idea sketched between feedings, but as a registered company with its own employer identification number. She had insisted on embedding AER, the first initials of her sons, within the registration sequence. A small gesture invisible to the world, but significant to her. 3 years stretched before her like an endurance course. The triplets grew from infants to toddlers to preschoolers, each developmental milestone marked in Jessica's ever-present journal. The company grew alongside them, slower, with more setbacks, but with the same determined progression. On a crisp autumn morning, Jessica sat cross-legged on Eleanor's living room floor, laptop balanced precariously on one knee, while the boys, now 3 years old, wobbled around her in perpetual motion. "Careful with Mommy's papers," she cautioned as Alex reached for a stack of technical schematics. His analytical mind, evident even at 3, seemed drawn to the orderly patterns of circuit diagrams. "I'm making robot," he declared solemnly, grabbing the papers anyway and toddling toward his building blocks. Jessica lunged to retrieve the essential documents, but too late. The movement startled Ryan, who had been meticulously arranging prototype components on the coffee table. The careful structure collapsed, sending small parts scattering across the hardwood floor. "No!" Ryan's distress was immediate and profound. Of the 3, he felt setbacks most acutely. "It's okay, sweetheart," Jessica soothed, gathering him into her arms while simultaneously trying to prevent Ethan from putting a small sensor in his mouth. "We can rebuild it even better." Eleanor appeared in the doorway, observing the chaos with practiced calm. "Your thesis defense is in 3 hours. Go get ready. I've got the demolition crew handled." Jessica glanced at the clock with alarm. Her master's thesis defense, the culmination of 3 years of night classes and online courses, had arrived. Between raising triplets and building HealthBridge, she had somehow completed her degree in engineering biomedicine. 2 hours later, Jessica stood before her thesis committee in a carefully pressed blouse purchased from a consignment shop. Her presentation on non-invasive neural monitoring systems for vulnerable patient populations reflected both academic rigor and practical application, the foundation of HealthBridge's first commercial product. From the back row came an unexpected sound. 3 small voices chanting in unison, "Mommy smart! Mommy smart!" Jessica turned to see Eleanor seated with the triplets, each boy dressed in his best outfit, legs swinging without reaching the floor. The committee members smiled indulgently as Eleanor whispered for quiet. Jessica felt tears threatening but forced them back. This moment, standing confident before experts in her field while her sons watched, felt like the first tangible victory against Richard's dismissal. 4 weeks later, Jessica crossed the graduation stage, accepting her diploma with trembling hands. The announcement, "Jessica Reynolds, Master of Science in Biomedical Engineering with Distinction," echoed through the auditorium. From the audience came unmistakable cheering, 3 distinct voices rising above the polite applause. "Mommy did it! Mommy did it!" The triplets jumped up and down, Eleanor barely containing their excitement. That evening, the small celebration in Eleanor's kitchen felt monumental. A homemade cake decorated by 3-year-old hands sat beside a bottle of champagne Eleanor had saved for this occasion. "To Dr. Jessica Reynolds," Eleanor toasted, using the honorific prematurely. "Not a doctor yet," Jessica corrected with a smile. "Just a matter of time," Eleanor insisted. "Now tell me about your meeting tomorrow." The meeting with potential investors had been arranged through the technology incubator. After 3 years of development, HealthBridge had a functioning prototype ready for larger-scale funding. Jessica had refined her business plan through countless iterations, each rejection teaching her something valuable about presentation and positioning. The following morning, Jessica entered the downtown office building feeling like an imposter. Men and women in tailored suits passed her in the lobby, their confident strides and expensive accessories marking them as inhabitants of a world she was merely visiting. Her own suit, purchased at a department store sale and tailored by Eleanor, felt conspicuous despite its professional appearance. In the conference room, 5 investors waited, 4 men and 1 woman, all wearing expressions of polite skepticism. Jessica connected her laptop to the projector, grateful that her hands remained steady despite her pounding heart. "HealthBridge offers a revolutionary approach to neural monitoring," she began, her voice finding its professional rhythm. "Our proprietary sensor array provides 93% of the accuracy of invasive methods, with none of the associated risks or discomfort." For 20 minutes, Jessica presented technical specifications, market analyses, and clinical trial results from the small hospital study they had conducted. When she finished, the silence felt oppressive. "Impressive technology," said the oldest investor finally, "but your team seems limited. Just you and 2 part-time engineers?" "Currently, yes," Jessica acknowledged, "but our structure allows us to—" "No manufacturing experience," interrupted another. "No established sales channels. No medical device launch history." Jessica took a deep breath. "What we lack in traditional structure, we make up for in innovation and efficiency. Our overhead is minimal, allowing us to—" "Let's discuss numbers," the woman investor cut in. "What's your valuation expectation?" By the meeting's end, Jessica had secured commitments for $500,000, a tenth of what she had hoped for, but enough to move forward. As she gathered her materials, the female investor approached. "Your technology is impressive," she said quietly. "But next time, lead with your neuroscience, not your motherhood. Some of these men still see mother of 3 as a liability, not a strength." The advice stung, but Jessica nodded. "Thank you for your honesty." With the new funding, HealthBridge moved from Eleanor's basement to a small commercial office. One room in an aging building on the outskirts of the Innovation District. The space smelled of fresh paint covering old problems, but the sign on the door, Healthbridge Innovations, gleamed with promise. "Welcome to Healthbridge," Jessica told her first two full-time employees, engineers she had convinced to leave stable jobs for her vision. "We're small now, but we won't be forever." The triplets, now approaching their 4th birthdays, adapted to the new routine with the resilience of children who had never known anything but change. 3 mornings a week, they attended a cooperative preschool where Jessica volunteered monthly to offset costs. Afternoons and 2 full weekdays were spent at the Healthbridge office in a designated kid-friendly corner with educational toys and small desks. Each night, after tucking the boys into bed, Jessica would sit beside them, reading not just children's books but simplified explanations of science and mathematics. The boys absorbed knowledge with astonishing speed, each developing distinct interests, even as they remained fiercely connected to each other. Alex organized his blocks by prime numbers today, Eleanor mentioned one evening, having watched the boys while Jessica attended a manufacturing consultation. "His teacher says she's never seen that in a 4-year-old. Ethan's vocabulary is testing at 3rd grade level," Jessica replied, reviewing test results from their developmental assessment. "And Ryan dismantled and reassembled my desk lamp yesterday. I still don't know how he reached it." The first clinical trial of Healthbridge's neural monitor began 6 months after their office move. Jessica stood in the neurology ward of Boston Memorial Hospital, watching as doctors connected the device to a stroke patient for continuous monitoring. "The sensitivity is remarkable," observed Dr. Chen, the lead neurologist. "We're seeing micro changes that our standard equipment misses entirely." The successful trial led to interest from 3 additional hospitals. Healthbridge suddenly shifted from theoretical to viable, with purchase orders replacing speculative discussions. Jessica hired a regulatory consultant to navigate FDA approval and a part-time marketing specialist to develop their brand presence. The first acquisition offer arrived via email on a Tuesday morning. $5 million for Healthbridge's technology and patents. Jessica stared at the number, mentally calculating what it would mean. Financial security for her sons, prestigious schools, a proper house. The temptation lasted approximately 30 seconds. $5 million for something that could help millions of patients? She asked aloud to her empty office. Not a chance. She declined the offer politely but firmly. Healthbridge was not built to be sold. It was built to change the paradigm of neural monitoring and patient care. At home that evening, Jessica watched her sons engaging in their individual pursuits. Alex sat surrounded by number puzzles, his face scrunched in concentration as he solved equations meant for children twice his age. Ethan read aloud from a chapter book, his expressive voice giving different inflections to each character. Ryan had disassembled a toy car and was methodically reconstructing it with modifications to its wheelbase. "Did you know," Ethan announced without looking up from his book, "that the brain has 100 billion neurons? That's more than all the stars in the Milky Way." "Actually," corrected Alex, "it's 86 billion neurons. The 100 billion is old data." "What makes neurons talk to each other?" Ryan asked, his hands still working on his modified toy. Jessica sat down among them, drawing a simple diagram of synaptic connections. "This is what Mommy's invention helps doctors see, how these messages travel and when they get interrupted." The boys gathered around, their curiosity unfeigned. Jessica felt a surge of fierce pride, these extraordinary children, growing and thriving despite every obstacle. That night, after the boys were asleep, Jessica collapsed across a pile of regulatory paperwork, exhaustion finally claiming her. She woke to find her sons carefully arranging a blanket over her shoulders, their small faces solemn with concern. "Mommy works too much," whispered Ethan. "She's building something important," Alex replied with the certainty of a much older child. "We help," Ryan added simply. Jessica pretended to remain asleep, her heart swelling as the boys tiptoed away. When they were gone, She reached for the latest medical technology journal that had arrived that day. On page 17, a small feature caught her eye. HealthBridge, the startup revolutionizing neural monitoring. The article was brief but glowing, highlighting the innovative approach and promising clinical results. Jessica read it twice, then carefully cut it out to be framed alongside the company's registration certificate. While she celebrated this small recognition with her tiny team, Jessica couldn't know that across the country, an executive at Johnson & Johnson was circling the article and writing a note in the margin. "Find this woman. I want this technology." The article in the Medical Technology Journal represented HealthBridge's first public recognition, small but significant. Jessica carefully placed the framed cutting on her desk beside a photo of the triplets, now approaching their 5th birthdays. The boys had grown from fragile preemies into energetic, brilliant children, each developing distinct personalities while maintaining the preternatural connection that seemed unique to multiples. Morning light filtered through the blinds of HealthBridge's modest office as Jessica reviewed the application for the MIT Innovation Award. The prestigious competition had never selected a medical device from a company as small as hers, but the clinical results from their hospital trials provided compelling evidence that couldn't be ignored. "The submission deadline is tomorrow," Jessica reminded her small team during their morning meeting. "Final revisions by 3 o'clock today." The phone rang, interrupting her. Eleanor's voice came through, tense and excited. "Turn on the business news. Channel 7. Now." Jessica fumbled for the remote control to the small television mounted in the corner of the conference room. The screen flickered to life, showing a segment about innovative medical technologies. And there it was, footage of their neural monitor being used in Boston Memorial's neurology department, with Dr. Chen explaining its advantages over traditional systems. "This represents a paradigm shift in how we monitor neural activity," Dr. Chen was saying. "The non-invasive approach provides superior data while eliminating patient discomfort." The news anchor's voice continued. "The device, developed by Boston-based startup HealthBridge Innovations, is one of the contenders for this year's MIT Innovation Award." Jessica stared at the screen in disbelief. Someone had leaked their application to the press. But who? And why? 3 weeks later, Jessica stood backstage at MIT's Innovation Showcase, her palms damp with nervous perspiration. The auditorium buzzed with hundreds of spectators, investors, medical professionals, and technology enthusiasts eager to see the next breakthrough. In the front row sat Eleanor with the triplets, each boy dressed in his best outfit, fidgeting with barely contained excitement. "Our next presenter developed a neural monitoring system that has shown remarkable results in clinical trials," announced the moderator. "Please welcome Jessica Reynolds, founder and CEO of HealthBridge Innovations." The spotlight felt blinding as Jessica walked onto the stage. Her presentation had been rehearsed countless times, in front of her bathroom mirror for her employees, for the triplets who offered enthusiastic if not entirely relevant feedback. Now, facing the judges and audience, she took a deep breath and began. "Neural monitoring has remained essentially unchanged for decades," she stated, her voice gaining strength. "Invasive, uncomfortable, and often yielding inconsistent results. HealthBridge has reimagined the entire approach." For 15 minutes, Jessica presented clinical data, technical specifications, and patient testimonials. The room remained attentive throughout, with occasional murmurs of appreciation at particularly impressive statistics. "Our trials demonstrate 78% greater accuracy than standard monitoring systems, with 0 patient discomfort reported," she concluded, displaying the final comparison chart. "This isn't incremental improvement, it's transformation." The judges' questions were probing but respectful. Jessica answered each with the confidence of someone who had lived and breathed her technology for years. When the final judge nodded his approval, relief washed over her. As Jessica gathered her materials, the head judge approached the microphone. "We have an unprecedented situation," he announced. "The judging panel has reached a unanimous decision without deliberation. The MIT Innovation Award this year goes to HealthBridge Innovations for their revolutionary neural monitoring system. The audience erupted in applause. Jessica stood frozen in shock until three small figures broke protocol, racing onto the stage and wrapping themselves around her legs. "Mommy won! Mommy won!" the triplets chanted in unison. Instead of attempting to remove the children, Jessica lifted them up, one by one, to join her at the podium. "My team extends beyond our employees," she explained, her voice thick with emotion. "These three boys have been part of HealthBridge from conception, quite literally." The photograph captured that moment, Jessica holding the crystal trophy with one arm, the other embracing her sons, appeared in the Boston Globe the next morning, accompanied by a feature on the Mother CEO revolutionizing medical technology. Within 48 hours of winning the award, Jessica's email inbox overflowed with meeting requests from investors who had previously ignored HealthBridge's outreach. The small office buzzed with new energy as Jessica prepared for a meeting with Cambridge Venture Partners, a prominent firm that had scheduled an urgent appointment. "They've requested full financial projections and 5-year growth forecasts," Jessica told Eleanor over coffee the morning of the meeting. "This could be the serious capital we need for nationwide expansion." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Are you ready for what comes with that level of investment? The expectations, the loss of control?" "I've structured our intellectual property protections meticulously," Jessica replied. "Any investment will be on our terms, not theirs." The meeting room at Cambridge Venture Partners exuded wealth and stability. Mahogany paneling, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River. Jessica presented to 6 partners, each with decades of investment experience. "Your technology is impressive," said the lead partner after her presentation. "But what truly interests us is your execution despite limited resources. 10 million is the figure we're prepared to discuss." Jessica maintained her composure despite her racing heart. $10 million, 20 times their current funding, would transform HealthBridge from promising startup to established player virtually overnight. The negotiations lasted 3 weeks. Jessica insisted on maintaining majority control, establishing clear milestones, and ensuring continued focus on research alongside commercial expansion. When the final documents were signed, HealthBridge secured $10 million in exchange for 30% equity, a valuation far exceeding Jessica's most optimistic projections. The company's growth accelerated dramatically. They moved to larger offices in Boston's Innovation District, hired a team of 20 engineers and specialists, and began development on the next-generation device that would become the NeuroSync. Jessica's schedule became increasingly demanding, requiring careful orchestration to balance company leadership with motherhood. "We're moving to the Warren Street building next month," Jessica told the triplets one evening as they sat around the kitchen table in the small apartment they'd called home for the past year. "We'll have our own bedrooms and a study space just for you 3. Will we still go to the office after school?" asked Alex, the most strategic of the boys, always thinking 3 steps ahead. 3 afternoons a week, Jessica confirmed. "You'll have a new area there too, bigger than the old one." The triplets' school had recommended specialized education programs after their exceptional abilities became increasingly apparent. At 5 years old, all 3 boys were reading at middle school level, with Alex demonstrating remarkable mathematical intuition, Ethan showing linguistic brilliance, and Ryan displaying extraordinary spatial reasoning and mechanical aptitude. Mrs. Reynolds, their teacher, had explained during a conference, "Your sons require intellectual stimulation beyond what standard curriculum can provide. They're demonstrating abilities typical of children twice their age." With the company's new resources, Jessica arranged for specialized tutors and enrolled the boys in advanced weekend programs. HealthBridge's new offices included a dedicated space where the triplets could continue their education after school hours while remaining close to their mother. 6 months after securing funding, Jessica stood on stage at the National Medical Device Conference presenting HealthBridge's expanded product line to an audience of healthcare professionals and hospital administrators. In the front row sat her sons, each absorbed in his own activity. Alex solving differential equations, Ethan writing in a journal, Ryan sketching design improvements for Jessica's slide presentation. The company's reputation grew steadily. Jessica's name began appearing in business publications, first in specialized medical technology journals, then in broader business magazines. The engineer mother changing neural monitoring read the headline in Business Insider, accompanied by a professional photograph of Jessica in business attire, her expression confident and determined. One evening, while the boys completed homework assignments far beyond their grade level, Jessica found herself scrolling through medical news online. A headline caught her attention. Harrington Medical Center announces new neural technology initiative. The article featured a photograph of Richard Harrington in an expensive suit, confidently describing his institution's plans to develop neural monitoring technology similar to HealthBridge's innovations. Jessica studied his face, older but still handsome, still radiating the same practiced confidence that had once captivated her. His quote in the article made her breath catch. "We believe the future of neurological care depends on revolutionary monitoring approaches. Harrington Medical Center intends to lead that revolution." She closed the browser window, a strange calm settling over her. Richard was attempting to enter her domain, unaware that the woman he had discarded as not enough was already transforming it. The HealthBridge office was decorated with blue and silver balloons when the triplets arrived after school on their 6th birthday. The entire team had signed cards for each boy, recognizing their unofficial status as company mascots and inspirations. "Happy birthday, gentlemen," said Christine, the newly hired CFO who had become Jessica's trusted second-in-command. "Your mother has built something extraordinary here, with you as her foundation." That evening, watching her sons blow out candles on their cake, Jessica felt a moment of perfect clarity. The apartment was modest compared to what Richard would have provided, but it was filled with love, intellectual curiosity, and genuine pride in shared accomplishment. Later, as she tucked the boys into bed, Ethan asked sleepily, "Mom, are we rich now?" Jessica considered the question carefully. "We have everything we need and opportunities to build more. That's a different kind of wealth than most people think about." "But we're going to be rich someday," Alex stated with his characteristic certainty. "HealthBridge is going to be huge." Jessica smiled, kissing each forehead gently. "Whatever happens, we have each other. That's what matters most." As she closed their bedroom door, Jessica couldn't know that Alex's prediction would prove extraordinarily accurate. She couldn't foresee that the photograph of their birthday celebration with Jessica and the 3 beaming boys would be exactly the image Richard Harrington would see by chance 5 years later, freezing in recognition at the sight of his own eyes multiplied by 3. Alex's prediction lingered in Jessica's thoughts as she closed the door to the boys' bedroom. The certainty in his voice, so reminiscent of Richard's confidence, yet warmed by something Richard had always lacked, genuine connection to others. The FDA approval came through on a crisp autumn morning 4 years later, when the triplets were approaching their 9th birthdays. Jessica sat alone in her office, staring at the official email confirming that HealthBridge's neural monitor was cleared for commercial use in hospitals nationwide. Outside her window, Boston's Innovation District bustled with activity, a far cry from Eleanor's basement where it all began. She pressed the intercom button. "Everyone in the conference room, please. 5 minutes." The HealthBridge team, now 20 people strong, gathered quickly, faces expectant. Jessica had maintained a careful poker face all morning, revealing nothing about the email that had arrived at 6:32. "As you know," she began formally, "we've been waiting for the FDA's decision on our application for commercial approval." Christine, the CFO who had become Jessica's right hand, leaned forward anxiously. "I received their response this morning," Jessica continued, deliberately drawing out the suspense. Then she smiled, a full, radiant smile that transformed her usually serious demeanor. "We're approved, without restrictions." The room erupted. Engineers high-fived, the marketing team hugged, and the administrative staff cheered. Christine wiped away unexpected tears. "This isn't just regulatory clearance," Jessica said when the celebration quieted. "This is validation of everything we've built, every late night, every failed prototype, every rejection we overcame. Today, HealthBridge officially transitions from promising startup to medical device manufacturer." 3 weeks later, Jessica stood in the neurology department of Massachusetts General Hospital, the very institution where she had met Richard 9 years earlier. The chief neurologist shook her hand as technicians installed the first commercial HealthBridge system. "We're honored to be your initial installation site," he said. "Your technology promises to transform how we monitor post-stroke recovery." Jessica nodded professionally, suppressing the urge to mention that she had once changed bed linens in this very department as a nursing student. The symmetry wasn't lost on her, returning to where it all began, but now as CEO of an ascendant medical technology company rather than a starstruck nursing student. That evening, Jessica chaired her first formal board meeting as the leader of a commercially approved medical device company. The mahogany conference table, leather chairs, and digital displays were light years away from the folding table in Eleanor's basement. "Third-quarter projections show accelerating adoption rates," Jessica explained, navigating through financial slides with practiced ease. "With installation commitments from 17 hospitals in the Northeast Corridor alone, we're positioned to exceed revenue targets by 30%. The board members, now including 2 venture capital partners and a medical device industry veteran, nodded approvingly. Jessica had matured into a confident executive, her presentation style crisp and authoritative. The only hint of her dual role came when she checked her watch discreetly, knowing Eleanor was watching the boys until 8:30. The following month, a courier delivered the latest issue of Business Insider to the HealthBridge office. Jessica's assistant gasped upon seeing the cover. Jessica herself, photographed in profile against the Boston skyline with the headline, "The Neural Revolution of Jessica Reynolds." The 8-page feature detailed HealthBridge's journey from concept to commercial success, with particular emphasis on Jessica's unconventional path. The writer had interviewed hospital administrators, physicians, and investors, all praising both the technology and the determined woman behind it. "Reynolds represents a new archetype in medical technology," wrote the journalist. "Combining clinical insight with engineering brilliance and maternal determination, she has created not just a successful company, but a new paradigm for neural care." At home that evening, Jessica read the article to the triplets, now in 3rd grade and displaying increasingly specialized talents. "They didn't mention that we helped design the sensor housing," Ryan pointed out, referring to the suggestion he'd made about ergonomics when he was only 6. "Or that Alex figured out the battery efficiency algorithm," added Ethan loyally. Jessica smiled, running her hand through Alex's hair. "The world doesn't need to know everything. We know the truth. HealthBridge is a family creation." The boys had been formally identified as profoundly gifted, each testing in the exceptional range across multiple disciplines while showing particular brilliance in their individual areas. Their elementary school had created customized learning plans, supplemented by the specialized tutors Jessica could now afford. 3 afternoons weekly, the boys came directly to the HealthBridge office after school, occupying a dedicated space Jessica had designed specifically for them, part classroom, part laboratory, part play area. Employees had grown accustomed to brilliant observations occasionally emanating from 9-year-olds passing through the engineering department. 2 months after the Business Insider feature, Jessica faced her most challenging decision to date. The company had expanded internationally with distribution agreements in Europe and exploratory partnerships in Asia. The demands on her time had grown exponentially, requiring her first extended international travel. "I'll only be gone for 10 days, Jessica explained to the triplets over dinner in their modest but comfortable Cambridge apartment. Eleanor will stay here with you and we'll video chat every morning and evening." "Will you bring us souvenirs from London?" asked Ethan, the most verbally expressive of the three. "Of course," Jessica promised, "and I'll need you to help Eleanor with a special project while I'm gone." The special project was Jessica's way of easing separation anxiety for both the boys and herself. She had prepared a series of scientific challenges for them to complete, each resulting in a piece of a larger puzzle that would eventually reveal the design concept for Healthbridge's next product. The London Medical Technology Conference marked Jessica's debut on the international stage. Standing before hundreds of healthcare professionals from across Europe, she presented Healthbridge's vision for neural monitoring with the confidence of someone who had always belonged in such venues. "Neural health remains the final frontier of modern medicine," she told the audience. "Healthbridge is committed to making that frontier accessible, measurable, and treatable." That evening, alone in her hotel room, Jessica video chatted with the triplets, who enthusiastically showed her their progress on the puzzle she'd left. As their faces beamed from her laptop screen, Jessica felt a wave of gratitude for how far they had all come, followed by a sharp pang of longing to be home with them. Upon her return, Jessica made a significant decision. Healthbridge had grown beyond its current location, and with the boys approaching the age where they needed more space, the timing was perfect for dual transitions. "We're buying a house," she announced to the triplets one Saturday morning, "in Cambridge, close enough to walk to your school." The boys erupted in excitement, bombarding her with questions about bedrooms, backyard space, and whether they could finally get a dog. The home Jessica purchased was nothing like Richard's sleek Beacon Hill apartment. It was a century-old colonial with generous proportions, a fenced yard, and enough bedrooms for each boy to have his own space plus a dedicated study area. The previous owner, a retired MIT professor, had converted the basement into a fully equipped laboratory, perfect for 3 scientifically inclined boys and their inventor mother. As Jessica unpacked boxes in their new home, an email notification chimed on her phone. The sender, Harrington Medical Center, made her freeze momentarily. The message was a generic invitation to participate in a medical technology showcase hosted by the prestigious hospital group. Curious, Jessica opened her laptop and searched for recent news about the Harrington Medical Center. There it was. Richard Harrington had been named CEO 6 months earlier, following his father's retirement. The accompanying photo showed him at a podium, distinguished gray beginning to appear at his temples, the same confident smile she remembered all too well. Further searching revealed more. Under Richard's leadership, the Harrington Medical Center had begun developing neural technologies that competed directly with Healthbridge's innovations. Their primary project, a neural monitoring system called NeuroPulse, was clearly positioned as a rival to Healthbridge's product line. Jessica closed her laptop, a strange calm settling over her. She had never told the boys much about their father, only that he had chosen not to be part of their lives. At 9 years old, they had occasionally asked questions, but seemed satisfied with her simple explanation. "He wasn't ready to be a father, and I knew I could raise you well on my own." That night, Jessica made a decision. It was time for more honesty. "There's something I want to talk to you about," she told the triplets as they sat in their new backyard enjoying the early evening air, "about your biological father." 3 identical pairs of eyes, so like Richard's, focused intently on her. "His name is Richard Harrington. He's a neurosurgeon who now runs a group of hospitals. When I told him I was pregnant with you 3, he decided he didn't want to be involved." "Why?" asked Ryan, the most sensitive of the 3. Jessica chose her words carefully. "He was very focused on his career and reputation. He didn't think a family fit with his plans." "Does he know about us now?" Alex inquired, his analytical mind immediately identifying the key question. "He knows you exist, but he's never reached out," Jessica answered honestly. "And he doesn't know about your accomplishments or how amazing you've all become." The boys processed this information with remarkable maturity. After a moment, Ethan spoke up. We don't need him. We have you, and Eleanor, and each other." Jessica hugged them tightly, amazed at their resilience and wisdom. 2 weeks later, Healthbridge's name appeared for the first time in a market analysis report directly comparing their technology with the developmental products from Harrington Medical Center. The report strongly favored Healthbridge's established platform over Harrington's unproven concepts. As the company continued its expansion, Jessica made another significant addition to the team, officially hiring Eleanor as Director of Research, bringing her mentor formally into the company she had helped create from the beginning. "You realize this makes you my boss now," Eleanor joked as she signed her employment contract. "You'll always be my teacher," Jessica replied with genuine emotion. The celebration of the triplets' 9th birthday filled their new home with laughter and life. Jessica had invited their classmates, tutors, and several Healthbridge employees who had watched the boys grow up alongside the company. The cake, designed to resemble a neural network, reflected the unusual but wonderful childhood the boys were experiencing. As Jessica watched her sons blow out their candles in perfect synchrony, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey from desperate single mother to successful CEO. The photo captured that moment. Jessica surrounded by her 3 beaming boys, their home filled with friends and colleagues, the Healthbridge logo on the cake a symbol of what they had built together. That same photograph, appearing in a local business publications feature on family-founded companies, would be exactly the image that Richard Harrington would see by chance 5 years later, freezing in recognition at the sight of his own eyes multiplied by 3. That photograph in the local business publication continued circulating in Boston's business community for months, occasionally catching the attention of medical professionals who recognized the Healthbridge logo. But Jessica had already moved beyond that milestone, her focus now on the breakthrough that would transform Healthbridge from successful medical device company to revolutionary healthcare innovator. 3 years had passed since that 9th birthday celebration. The triplets were now 12, standing at the threshold of adolescence with all its complexities magnified by their exceptional intellects. Their new home in Cambridge had become a hub of innovation, the basement laboratory frequently producing concepts that made their way to Healthbridge's research division. On a crisp autumn morning, Jessica stood on stage at the International Neurological Association conference in Chicago. Behind her, a massive screen displayed brain imaging unlike anything the medical community had seen before. "What you're witnessing isn't just improved monitoring," Jessica explained to the hushed audience of neurology's global elite. "The NeuroSync doesn't just observe neural activity, it interacts with it in real time, allowing for unprecedented interventions in neurodegenerative conditions." The data flowing across the screen showed neural pathways lighting up in patterns that corresponded to the NeuroSync's subtle interventions. The device, smaller than a credit card and thinner than a pencil, represented 3 years of intensive development and clinical trials. "In patients with early-stage Parkinson's, we've documented 37% reduction in tremor episodes without medication," Jessica continued, advancing to the next slide. "For Alzheimer's patients, cognitive retention tests show marked improvement in short-term memory function when the NeuroSync is active." The audience erupted in applause when Jessica concluded her presentation. Medical breakthroughs were announced regularly at such conferences, but true paradigm shifts were exceedingly rare. Everyone in the room recognized they were witnessing a pivotal moment in neurological treatment. Dr. Marcus Chen, now Chief of Neurology at Johns Hopkins and an early adopter of Healthbridge's first device, approached Jessica after the presentation. "You've outdone yourself, Jessica," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "From monitoring to intervention, it's the holy grail of neural technology." "We're just getting started," Jessica replied with quiet confidence. "The platform has applications we're only beginning to explore." The success of the NeuroSync's conference debut catalyzed the next phase of Healthbridge's evolution. Within 6 months, the company had outgrown its Boston headquarters, necessitating a dramatic expansion. Jessica chose Chicago for their new global headquarters, 5 gleaming floors atop a sleek skyscraper overlooking Lake Michigan. The day of the ribbon-cutting ceremony, snow fell gently over Chicago, coating the windows of the expansive lobby where employees, investors, and media gathered. The triplets stood alongside Jessica, each 12-year-old now tall enough to reach her shoulder, wearing custom-tailored suits that reflected their emerging personal styles. Alex in classic navy, Ethan in a more creative charcoal with subtle patterns, Ryan in precision-cut gray. Healthbridge began in a borrowed basement with 3 newborns sleeping beside my desk, Jessica told the assembled crowd. Today, we employ over 200 people across 3 continents, and those babies have grown into remarkable young men who continue to inspire everything we build. The Chicago Tribune's business section headline the next day read, "Healthbridge. Boston's loss is Chicago's gain as billion-dollar innovator relocates." The accompanying article noted that the company's valuation had reached $1.5 billion following FDA classification of the NeuroSync as a breakthrough therapy device. Jessica's corner office on the 50th floor offered breathtaking views of Lake Michigan. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around 2 sides, while the interior wall featured a glass partition overlooking the main research laboratory. The opposite wall displayed framed patents, 17 now, alongside photographs marking significant milestones in both the company's and the triplets' lives. On their 13th birthday, Jessica presented the boys with their first official Healthbridge lab coats, each embroidered with their name and the company logo. "These aren't just symbolic," she explained as they unwrapped the gifts in their home's dining room. "Starting next week, you'll be official interns in the research division, 3 afternoons a week after school." The boys exchanged excited glances. Though they had informally contributed ideas for years, formal positions represented a significant step toward the futures they were already envisioning for themselves. "Does this mean we get access to the restricted labs?" asked Alex, already thinking about the advanced neural mapping project he had been theorizing about. "Level 2 clearance," Jessica confirmed, "and individual research mentors aligned with your interests." Within weeks, the triplets had become fixtures in Healthbridge's research division. Alex, with his extraordinary mathematical mind, joined the data analytics team developing predictive models for neural degeneration patterns. His insights into statistical anomalies in Alzheimer's progression led to a presentation at the company's quarterly research symposium. Ethan's linguistic brilliance and communication skills made him valuable in the patient experience division, where he helped translate complex neurological concepts into accessible information for patients and families. His redesign of the NeuroSync user manual was immediately adopted company-wide, reducing support calls by 40%. Ryan, with his intuitive understanding of mechanical systems and spatial relationships, thrived in the physical engineering lab. When a senior engineer struggled with miniaturizing a component of the next-generation NeuroSync, Ryan quietly sketched an alternative approach that ultimately solved the problem. During a board meeting 6 months after the triplets began their internships, Christine presented a market analysis slide that caused a murmur of appreciation around the table. "The NeuroSync platform has officially surpassed $1 billion in valuation alone," she reported. "We've received 4 acquisition offers in the past quarter, the highest at $800 million for just the neural modulation patent." Jessica shook her head slightly. "We're not selling patents piecemeal. The strength of Healthbridge is our integrated approach." After the meeting, Jessica found an email awaiting her response, an invitation to be the keynote speaker at the upcoming annual Medical Innovation Summit in Chicago, hosted by the American Medical Association. The event represented the most prestigious gathering in medical technology, with attendance limited to the top executives, researchers, and physicians in the field. Jessica accepted immediately, already envisioning the platform as perfect for the NeuroSync's expanded capabilities announcement. What she didn't notice was the updated speaker list attached to the confirmation email, a list that now included Dr. Richard Harrington, CEO of Harrington Medical Center, presenting their competitive neural technology, the neuropulse. As the summit approached, Jessica became aware of increasing media coverage comparing Healthbridge's established success with Harrington Medical Center's emerging neural technology division. A feature in Medical Technology Today placed photos of Jessica and Richard on opposite pages, calling them competing visionaries in the neural innovation space. Jessica studied Richard's photograph carefully. At 46, he remained handsome, distinguished gray at his temples only enhancing his authoritative appearance. His expression conveyed the same confident certainty that had once captivated her, and the same calculated ambition that had led him to reject his own children. That evening, Jessica found the triplets in the home laboratory, working together on what appeared to be a complex circuit board. "What's this project?" she asked, observing the sophisticated design taking shape. "Ryan's entry for the National Young Inventors Challenge," Alex explained. "We're helping with the neural interface calibration." Jessica examined the device more closely, recognizing elements that clearly built upon Healthbridge technology while introducing novel approaches that hadn't occurred to her adult engineers. "This could revolutionize astronaut monitoring during long-duration missions," Ryan explained, his usual reticence falling away when discussing his creation. "It compensates for radiation interference and zero-gravity neural fluid shifts." The pride Jessica felt watching her sons collaborate transcended anything she had experienced with Healthbridge's commercial success. These extraordinary young men, rejected before birth by their father, were already contributing to science in meaningful ways, driven by curiosity rather than the status-seeking that defined Richard's career. 1 week before the Medical Innovation Summit, Jessica sat with the triplets in their living room, a serious expression on her face. "There's something you should know about the upcoming conference," she began carefully. "Your biological father will be there, presenting his company's neural technology." The boys exchanged glances, their connection allowing silent communication that Jessica had learned to recognize but not interpret. "Will he know who we are?" asked Ethan, always the most direct with emotional questions. Jessica shook her head. "I don't believe so. He's never shown any interest in finding out about you, and there's no reason he would connect me with the Jessica Reynolds who runs Healthbridge." "Unless he's seen the Business Insider profile," Alex pointed out with practical logic. "Your background was clearly outlined there." Jessica had considered this. It's possible, but unlikely. Richard never paid attention to anything outside his immediate concerns. Ryan, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "What if he recognizes himself in us? People always say we look just like you, but we must have some of his features too." The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Jessica had never denied the physical resemblance between the boys and their father, the same penetrating eyes, the same elegant hands with long surgeon's fingers, even certain expressions that sometimes startled her with their familiarity. "If he makes the connection," Jessica said carefully, "we'll handle it with dignity. But remember, biology doesn't define family. He contributed DNA, nothing more." The night before the summit, Jessica finalized her presentation in the hotel suite, carefully reviewing slides that demonstrated the NeuroSync's superiority over competing technologies, including, specifically, the Harrington Medical Center's NeuroPulse. The comparison wasn't merely competitive positioning. Clinical data clearly showed the NeuroSync outperforming the NeuroPulse in every measured parameter. As she worked, the triplets prepared Ryan's demonstration for the Young Innovators panel scheduled for the second day of the conference. His neural monitoring device for astronauts had been selected as one of 5 featured innovations from scientists under 18. Jessica paused in her work, watching her sons collaborate with the easy confidence of young men who had never been told they couldn't achieve something. The contrast with Richard's limiting worldview couldn't be more stark. She added one subtle slide to her presentation, a quote from an unnamed leading neurologist who had once dismissed non-invasive neural monitoring as insufficient for clinical application. The quote was taken directly from Richard's published paper 3 years earlier, though his name wasn't attached to it in her presentation. The final slide contained a simple message. The future belongs to those who recognize potential where others see limitations. While she finalized these preparations, Jessica couldn't know that in a suite 3 floors above, Richard Harrington was reviewing his own presentation, unaware that the keynote speaker he hoped to overshadow was the woman he had dismissed 15 years earlier, or that the young innovators featured the following day would include 3 boys carrying his genetic legacy. The presentation slide containing Richard's unattributed quote seemed to glow with quiet vindication on Jessica's laptop screen. She closed the file with a satisfied click, knowing tomorrow's keynote would deliver not just innovation announcements, but a subtle message years in the making. Outside the hotel window, Chicago's skyline glittered against the night sky, Lake Michigan a vast darkness beyond. "Mom, should we wear our Healthbridge lapel pins tomorrow?" Alex asked, adjusting his tie in the mirror of their luxury suite. At 14, he had grown remarkably tall, his features sharpening into a face that increasingly reflected Richard's bone structure. "Definitely," Jessica replied, watching her 3 sons prepare for the most significant professional event of their young lives. "You 3 are as much a part of Healthbridge as anyone." Morning arrived with perfect late autumn clarity, sunlight glinting off the glass facades of downtown Chicago. The Four Seasons Grand Ballroom had been transformed into an elegant conference venue, with the Healthbridge logo prominently displayed alongside other industry leaders. Jessica wore a custom-tailored sapphire dress that complemented her eyes and projected confident authority. The triplets, in matching charcoal suits with subtle individual touches, looked remarkably grown up as they reviewed the conference program together. "Dr. Harrington's presentation is scheduled directly after the lunch break," noted Ethan, always attentive to schedules and communication details. "Your keynote opens the conference in 30 minutes. Jessica nodded, scanning the gathering crowd of medical technology elites. "Remember, regardless of what happens today, we conduct ourselves with dignity. We have nothing to prove to anyone." Across the ballroom, Richard Harrington circulated confidently among hospital administrators and medical device investors. His custom Italian suit and Patek Philippe watch projected exactly the image he'd spent decades cultivating: success, authority, impeccable taste. Unaware of who would soon take the stage, he laughed at a colleague's joke while accepting a flute of champagne from a passing server. "Richard, have you seen the attendance list? Quite impressive this year," remarked Dr. Matthias Klein, director of the American Association of Neurosurgery. "Particularly excited about this Healthbridge keynote. Their neural modulation technology is reportedly years ahead of your neuropulse." Richard's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Innovation is a long game, Matthias. Healthbridge may have captured attention with their early-to-market approach, but the neuropulse offers fundamentally superior—" His words evaporated as the ballroom lights dimmed slightly and spotlights illuminated the entrance. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a pathway through which Jessica Reynolds walked with measured confidence, the triplets following in perfect formation. The resemblance between the boys and Richard was unmistakable. The same height for their age, the same posture, the same penetrating gaze that had built Richard's reputation for diagnostic brilliance. "My God," whispered Klein, following Richard's suddenly frozen stare. "Those must be the famous prodigy triplets I've read about. The tallest one won the National Science Prize last month. Harvard and Stanford are already competing for them, I hear." Richard's champagne glass trembled slightly, amber liquid splashing onto his perfectly pressed shirt cuff. His eyes darted from the boys to Jessica, disbelief washing over his features as recognition dawned. The confident young nurse he had discarded 15 years ago had transformed into a commanding presence whose company valuation exceeded his hospital group's annual revenue. "Richard, are you all right?" Klein asked, noticing his colleague's sudden pallor. "Fine," Richard managed, his voice unnaturally tight. "Just remembered an important call I need to make before the first presentation. The ballroom lights dimmed further as the conference chairman approached the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker. Dr. Jessica Reynolds is the founder and CEO of HealthBridge Innovations, whose neural monitoring and modulation technologies have transformed treatment protocols for degenerative neural conditions worldwide. Please welcome Dr. Reynolds to share HealthBridge's latest breakthrough. Applause thundered through the ballroom as Jessica ascended the steps to the stage. Richard remained rooted in place, unable to retreat without drawing attention, forced to watch from the front row as Jessica took command of the room. Neural health represents the final frontier of modern medicine, Jessica began, her voice steady and authoritative. For too long we've been limited by technologies that could observe but not interact, that could diagnose but not intervene. Her presentation flowed with practiced precision, each slide building upon the last to reveal the revolutionary capabilities of the enhanced NeuroSync. Clinical data demonstrated efficacy rates that made competitive technologies appear primitive by comparison. Throughout her speech, Jessica never once glanced directly at Richard, though she knew exactly where he sat, until she reached the slide with his quote. Some prominent neurologists once claimed that non-invasive neural monitoring would never achieve the precision necessary for clinical application in complex cases, she said, allowing the words to linger on screen. Data has proven otherwise. The NeuroSync now delivers 97% of the accuracy of invasive methods with zero patient discomfort and significantly reduced complications. Only then did she allow her gaze to meet Richard's, a moment of silent acknowledgement that passed like an electrical current between them. His face had lost all color, the recognition in his eyes confirming what she had suspected. He knew exactly who she was, and perhaps more importantly, who the three young men in the front row must be. Jessica continued seamlessly, transitioning to the NeuroSync's groundbreaking results in early-stage Parkinson's treatment. The data was irrefutable, the clinical outcomes remarkable. When she concluded 30 minutes later, the standing ovation was immediate and enthusiastic. Richard remained seated, a solitary island in a sea of standing admirers. "Before I close," Jessica said as the applause began to fade, "I'd like to acknowledge the extraordinary young men who have been part of HealthBridge's journey from the beginning. My sons, Alex, Ethan, and Ryan." The spotlight found the triplets in the front row, illuminating three faces that bore undeniable resemblance to the man seated just feet away from them. The crowd applauded politely, unaware of the personal drama unfolding before them. As Jessica descended from the stage, accepting congratulations from colleagues, she observed Richard's desperate attempt to appear composed. The remainder of the morning sessions passed in a blur of presentations and panel discussions. The triplets attracted considerable attention, fielding questions about their involvement with HealthBridge with remarkable poise for 14-year-olds. During the lunch break, Jessica deliberately positioned herself and the boys at a table visible from the main entrance, knowing Richard would be forced to pass them when returning for the afternoon session. As predicted, he appeared at the doorway, hesitating visibly when he spotted their table. After a moment's clear internal debate, Richard approached, his professional smile firmly in place. "Dr. Reynolds," he said, his voice betraying only the slightest tremor. "Remarkable presentation. Your neural modulation approach is quite innovative." Jessica met his gaze evenly. "Thank you, Dr. Harrington. Coming from Harrington Medical Center's CEO, that's quite a compliment." The triplets observed this exchange with intense curiosity. Alex's analytical gaze moved between his mother and this stranger who somehow seemed familiar. Ethan noted the tension in the man's posture, the forced casualness. Ryan, always the most perceptive about people, recognized something in the man's eyes that matched his own reflection. "These must be your remarkable sons I've heard about," Richard continued, unable to prevent himself from staring at three younger versions of himself. "Yes," Jessica replied simply. "Alex, Ethan, and Ryan." They're presenting in tomorrow's Young Innovators panel." The boys nodded politely but offered no conversation, following their mother's earlier guidance about dignity and restraint. Richard struggled visibly for words. "The resemblance to their father must be strong. Genetics are fascinating that way," Jessica responded coolly. "If you'll excuse us, we need to prepare for the afternoon sessions." As Richard walked away, his expensive shoes suddenly seeming to weigh 1,000 pounds each, the triplets exchanged meaningful glances. "That was him, wasn't it?" whispered Ethan once Richard was out of earshot. Jessica nodded slightly. Yes, that was Richard Harrington. The afternoon sessions proceeded with excruciating formality. Richard's presentation of the neuropulse technology, once the pride of his research division, now seemed derivative and inadequate compared to the health bridge innovations revealed that morning. The clinical data Jessica had presented had effectively neutralized his key selling points before he could even make them. Throughout his presentation, Richard found himself stumbling over words he had rehearsed perfectly, his legendary confidence shaken by the presence of Jessica and three boys whose existence he had tried to erase with a check for $10,000 15 years ago. During the evening reception, Richard deliberately positioned himself to intercept Jessica as she moved between conversation groups. When he finally maneuvered close enough, his carefully prepared words evaporated at the glacial look she gave him. "Jessica, I think we should talk privately," he managed, lowering his voice. "About everything." "I don't believe we have anything to discuss, Dr. Harrington," she replied evenly. "Any communication should go through appropriate channels." Before Richard could respond, Alex appeared at his mother's side, as if materializing from thin air. With remarkable poise, he extended a business card. "My mother anticipated you might attempt an approach," he said, his tone reflecting a calculated coldness that Richard recognized as his own. "These are the contact details for Healthbridge's legal department. Any communication should go through them first." Richard stared at the teenager, momentarily speechless. "You don't understand," he finally said, desperation seeping into his voice. "I'm your father." "Biologically, perhaps," Ryan responded, joining his brother. "But a father is more than DNA, Dr. Harrington." Ethan completed the trio, his eloquent voice carrying just enough volume for nearby attendees to overhear. "We know exactly who you are. Mom never hid the truth. We also know what you said to her when you found out about us." The gathered medical elite observed the confrontation with poorly disguised fascination. Jessica approached calmly, the contrast between her composed authority and Richard's visible distress unmistakable. "Your sons are extraordinary," Richard managed, attempting to salvage some dignity from the situation. "Yes, they are," Jessica confirmed with quiet certainty. "And as you once predicted, I built my own world. It just turned out to be much larger than yours." While the crowd around them buzzed with whispered speculation, Richard Harrington felt his carefully constructed world begin to crumble, suddenly understanding that the three remarkable young men everyone admired weren't just the children he had rejected. They were his legacy lost, now belonging entirely to the woman he had deemed insufficient. The silence that followed Jessica's cutting remark seemed to expand through the crowded reception hall. Richard's face, always so carefully composed for public appearances, now betrayed a complex mix of shock, recognition, and dawning horror. The triplets stood firm beside their mother, a physical manifestation of the legacy he had rejected 15 years earlier. Jessica guided her sons away from Richard with a gentle touch on their shoulders, leaving him standing alone as whispers began to circulate through the crowd of medical elites. She had not planned such a public confrontation, but now that it had occurred, she wouldn't shield Richard from the consequences of his choices. The remainder of the evening reception unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Jessica moved through the room with practiced ease, accepting congratulations on her keynote presentation while deflecting curious inquiries about the tense exchange that many had witnessed. The triplets remained close, handling questions about their father with a maturity that made Jessica's heart swell with pride. "We've always known the truth," Alex explained to a particularly persistent neurologist from Johns Hopkins. "Our mother never fabricated stories or false sentimentality. We understand exactly who our biological father is and the choice he made." As the reception drew to a close, Jessica noticed Richard attempting to approach once more, his expression now desperate rather than confident. With a subtle nod to Christine, her CFO interceded smoothly, engaging Richard in conversation about hospital procurement protocols while Jessica and the boys made their exit. In their hotel suite, the triplets finally expressed the emotions they had controlled so admirably throughout the evening. "He looks exactly like us," Ryan observed quietly, studying his reflection in the bathroom mirror. "Or rather, we look like him. Genetically speaking, we share approximately 50% of his DNA," Alex noted, his analytical mind seeking refuge in scientific fact. "But epigenetic factors influenced by mom's parenting have likely expressed those genes quite differently." Ethan, always the most verbally expressive, sat heavily on the sofa. "I always imagined he'd be, I don't know, more impressive. He seemed so ordinary, despite the expensive suit and watch." Jessica listened to their observations, giving them space to process the momentous encounter. "People often confuse external trappings of success with genuine significance," she finally said. "Your father achieved exactly what he prioritized, professional status and material wealth, but he sacrificed the opportunity to know 3 extraordinary human beings." The following morning, the conference ballroom buzzed with energy as attendees filed in for the awards banquet. Overnight, the story of the HealthBridge CEO's connection to Richard Harrington had spread through the medical technology community like wildfire. The prestigious setting had transformed into a theater for personal drama that rivaled any scientific revelation. Jessica arrived wearing a striking emerald gown that contrasted dramatically with her usual conservative business attire. The triplets, in tailored tuxedos that enhanced their growing resemblance to Richard, moved with the self-possession of young men accustomed to navigating professional environments. The conference chairman approached their table immediately. "Dr. Reynolds, I want to assure you that the program will proceed exactly as planned. Your Innovator of the Year award presentation is scheduled directly after the main course." Jessica nodded appreciatively. "Thank you. I understand this situation has created unexpected complexity." "The committee stands by its selection," he replied firmly. "Your contributions to neurological treatment transcend any personal narratives." As the ballroom filled, Jessica noticed Richard enter, his complexion ashen despite obvious attempts to appear composed. He took his assigned seat at a table far across the room, surrounded by colleagues who seemed uncomfortably aware of the situation. The first courses arrived, accompanied by practiced small talk at Jessica's table. The triplets engaged confidently with the neurosurgery department chair from Mayo Clinic, discussing Ryan's neural monitoring system for astronauts with remarkable technical precision. When the chairman approached the podium after dessert had been cleared, the room quieted expectantly. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to present our highest honor, the Innovator of the Year Award. This recognition celebrates not just scientific achievement, but transformative vision that changes medical paradigms." Jessica felt a momentary tightening in her chest as the spotlight found her table. 15 years of determination, sacrifice, and relentless work crystallized into this moment. Dr. Jessica Reynolds has revolutionized neurological treatment through technology that many experts once deemed impossible, the chairman continued. The NeuroSync platform has already improved outcomes for over 70,000 patients worldwide. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Reynolds to accept this well-deserved recognition. The applause was thunderous as Jessica made her way to the stage. Standing at the podium, crystal award in hand, she allowed herself a moment to locate her sons in the audience, their faces beaming with unfiltered pride. She then deliberately sought Richard's gaze across the room, finding him staring with an expression of painful recognition. "Thank you for this tremendous honor," Jessica began, her voice steady and clear. 15 years ago, I was a newly graduated nurse facing what seemed like insurmountable challenges. Today, HealthBridge employs over 300 brilliant minds dedicated to transforming neurological care. She paused, surveying the rapt audience. Innovation rarely follows a straight path. The most significant breakthroughs often emerge from unexpected circumstances and difficult choices. Jessica's gaze returned briefly to Richard. Perseverance in the face of dismissal and doubt has defined both my personal and professional journey. When experts with prestigious credentials declared non-invasive neural monitoring impossible, their skepticism became our roadmap for proving otherwise. The audience remained silent, many now aware of the subtext beneath her carefully chosen words. "I would like to thank several people who made this journey possible," Jessica continued. Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, who provided both mentorship and belief when I needed it most. My extraordinary team at HealthBridge, who transform vision into reality every day. She took a deep breath, her voice softening slightly. "I would especially like to thank Dr. Richard Harrington." A murmur rippled through the ballroom. Richard visibly stiffened in his chair. 15 years ago, Dr. Harrington showed me that I would need to build my own path, a valuable lesson I've shared with our sons, Alex, Ethan, and Ryan. The spotlight shifted to illuminate the triplets, who stood in perfect unison, acknowledging the audience with poised nods. "They have never needed his surname to achieve extraordinary things," Jessica continued, her voice gaining strength. "Perhaps this proves definitively that I was, after all, more than sufficient." The silence that followed felt charged with electricity before erupting into applause that contained both appreciation for her achievement and recognition of the personal triumph her words represented. Richard remained seated as others stood around him, his face a mask of contained anguish. The dynasty he had prioritized above fatherhood, the professional reputation he had protected by rejecting Jessica and their children, now seemed hollow compared to what she had built without him. As Jessica returned to her table, accepting congratulations from colleagues, she noticed Richard abruptly leaving the ballroom, his departure unnoted amid the continuing celebration. The remainder of the banquet passed in a blur of well-wishers and industry leaders eager to discuss potential collaborations. When Jessica and the triplets finally returned to their suite, they found an envelope that had been slipped under their door. "It's from him," Ethan said quietly, recognizing the Harrington Medical Center letterhead. Jessica handed the envelope to the boys. "This is for you to decide. You can read it, ignore it, or we can dispose of it together." After a brief silent exchange of glances, that remarkable nonverbal communication they had perfected, Alex carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. "Jessica and Sons, I request a private meeting tomorrow morning. There are matters that should be discussed away from public scrutiny. Richard Harrington." The presumptuous tone, the absence of apology, the business-like approach, all so characteristic of the man who had offered a check instead of support 15 years earlier. "What do you want to do?" Jessica asked, leaving the decision entirely to her sons. The triplets conferred briefly before Alex spoke. "We'll meet him, but on our terms. Not as supplicants seeking his approval, but as individuals who deserve answers." The following morning, Richard paced nervously in the private meeting room he had reserved at the hotel. When the door opened, he turned expectantly, only to find the triplets entering without Jessica. "Your mother," he began. "Will join us later," Ethan interrupted smoothly. "We requested this opportunity to speak with you first." Richard stared at the three teenagers, poised, articulate, and undeniably his sons. The precision of Alex's analytical gaze, the eloquence in Ethan's posture, Ryan's observant silence, all reflected aspects of himself, refined and improved. "You look so much like," Richard attempted. "Genetics are fascinating," Alex cut in, echoing his mother's words from the previous day. But we didn't come to discuss hereditary traits. We have questions about our medical history and other factual matters. For the next hour, Richard endured the most clinical, impersonal interview imaginable. The boys inquired about family medical conditions, genetic predispositions, and intellectual aptitudes in his lineage. They asked precise questions about his educational background and professional development. Not once did they inquire about his feelings, his regrets, or his reasons for abandonment. When their prepared questions were exhausted, Richard finally asked the question that had been tormenting him. "Don't you want to know why I wasn't part of your lives?" The triplets exchanged glances before Ethan responded. "We don't need your version of events. We have the evidence of your actions. That tells us everything we need to know." As they stood to leave, Richard made a desperate final appeal. "You carry my DNA, my talent. I could guide your careers, open doors that would otherwise remain closed to you." Ryan, who had remained mostly silent, turned back with an expression so reminiscent of Jessica that Richard felt physically struck. "Dr. Harrington, your genetic contribution is undeniable. But what we do with that inheritance was our mother's teaching. As for opening doors—" He paused, offering a smile that contained no warmth. "We're already on the other side of doors you're still trying to reach." While reporters captured the dramatic reunion story in headlines across medical publications, Richard watched helplessly from his Boston office as his carefully constructed reputation began to unravel. The narrative of the brilliant neurosurgeon who had abandoned his children, now proven exceptional, while their mother built a billion-dollar company, undermined everything he had worked to establish. The narrative that had shattered Richard's carefully constructed reputation continued to spread through medical publications and beyond. He sat in his Boston office, blinds drawn against the gray November morning, watching the cascade of notifications on his phone. Each news alert felt like another nail in the coffin of his career. The Wall Street Journal had published a feature titled "CEO Billionaire Reveals: Famous Neurosurgeon Abandoned Triplet Sons," accompanied by side-by-side photos of Richard and the three boys, the resemblance undeniable. 2 days after the Medical Innovation Summit, Harrington Medical Center's board had convened an emergency meeting. Richard stared at the formal email on his screen, its bureaucratic language barely disguising the panic. In light of recent revelations, the planned partnership with Mayo Clinic has been placed on hold pending thorough evaluation of leadership concerns. His phone buzzed again. A statement from his ex-wife, now junior senator for Massachusetts. "I am deeply disappointed by the revelations regarding Dr. Harrington's character and past actions. While our marriage ended for different reasons, this pattern of behavior raises serious concerns that I was unaware of during our relationship." Richard closed his eyes, massaging his temples. How quickly 15 years of meticulous career building could unravel. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had rejected Jessica and their children to protect his professional trajectory, and now that very rejection threatened everything he had prioritized. His hotel room in Chicago felt suffocating despite its luxury. Richard turned on the television, immediately confronted by footage of the triplets at the Young Innovators panel. Ryan was explaining his neural monitoring system for astronauts, his hands moving with the same precise gestures Richard recognized from his own surgical technique. "The challenge with long-duration space missions involves radiation interference with traditional monitoring systems," Ryan explained to the rapt audience. "This adaptive array compensates by redistributing sensor functions when individual nodes experience degradation." The camera panned to Alex and Ethan sitting nearby, their proud expressions mirroring the one Richard had seen countless times in photographs of his own father watching him at medical conferences. Richard couldn't tear his eyes away as Alex took the stage next, discussing the ethical implications of AI in neurological diagnostics with a maturity that seemed impossible in a 14-year-old. While algorithm-based diagnostics offer remarkable accuracy, we must maintain human oversight in neural intervention, Alex argued. The qualitative experience of consciousness cannot be fully captured by quantitative measurements alone. Ethan followed, demonstrating a prototype he had developed for nonverbal communication in ALS patients, his explanation both technically precise and deeply empathetic. It was like watching enhanced versions of himself, all his intellect and scientific aptitude, but with emotional intelligence and ethical frameworks he had never prioritized. The boys possessed not only his cognitive gifts, but qualities he recognized from Jessica: her compassion, her intuitive understanding of patient needs, her ability to communicate complex concepts accessibly. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. When he opened the door, Jessica stood in the hallway, composed and professional in her executive attire. "May we speak privately?" Richard asked, stepping back to allow her entry. Jessica entered but remained standing, maintaining careful distance. "I thought we should have one conversation as adults before returning to our respective lives." "You've destroyed my reputation," Richard accused, unable to keep bitterness from his voice. "No, Richard," Jessica replied calmly. "I simply revealed the truth you've concealed for 15 years. I never mentioned your name to the boys until they turned 12. I never encouraged them to resent you or seek revenge. What do you want from me now? Money? Public acknowledgement? We could reach some agreement." Jessica's laugh stopped him, a genuine sound of incredulity that made him flinch. "Healthbridge is valued at nearly $4 billion, Richard. My personal stake is worth more than the entire Harrington Medical Center. I don't need your money now, just as I didn't need that $10,000 check you offered me 15 years ago." Richard sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the magnitude of his miscalculation finally sinking in. "I want to know my sons," he said quietly. "They aren't infants you can reject or embrace at your convenience anymore," Jessica responded. "They're young adults with their own opinions. If they want a relationship with you, I won't stand in their way. But the decision is entirely theirs." That afternoon, Richard waited anxiously in the hotel lobby. To his surprise, all 3 boys appeared precisely at the agreed time, their expressions neutral but evaluative. Alex took the lead, his posture a mirror of Richard's own professional stance. "We should be clear from the outset," Alex began as they settled into a private corner of the lobby. "We haven't come seeking a father figure. We have specific questions about our medical family history and would like to understand certain inherited traits." For the next hour, Richard endured what felt like a clinical interview. The boys asked detailed questions about familial disease patterns, cognitive aptitudes, and developmental milestones. They inquired about his educational background and early research interests. Not once did they ask personal questions about his life or express any emotional vulnerability. "Don't you want to know why I wasn't there for you?" Richard finally asked, desperation seeping into his voice. "We don't require your version," Ethan replied with unsettling composure. "We have the evidence of your actions. That tells us everything essential about your character and priorities." When they stood to leave, Richard made one final attempt to establish connection. "You carry my DNA, my intellectual gifts. I could guide your careers, open doors at the best institutions." Ryan, who had remained mostly quiet, turned back with an expression that struck Richard like a physical blow. "Dr. Harrington, your genetic contribution is undeniable, but what we've done with that inheritance was our mother's teaching. As for opening doors," he smiled slightly, "we're already on the other side of doors you're still trying to reach." 2 weeks later, Richard sat in his Boston office watching Healthbridge's stock soar after the announcement of a $1.2 billion government contract to implement the NeuroSync in veterans' hospitals nationwide. On his second monitor, an email from Harrington Medical Center's legal department informed him that the board had voted for his replacement to preserve the institutional integrity of the organization. When his phone rang, he answered quickly upon seeing Alex's name on the caller ID. "You've decided to give me a chance?" Richard asked, hope evident in his voice. "Actually," Alex replied, his tone coolly professional, We're calling to inform you that our mother has accepted the acquisition proposal for Harrington Medical Center by the Healthbridge Group. The transition will be announced next week. We thought you should hear it directly rather than through press releases. Richard's hand tightened around the phone. She's buying my hospital? The board approached her, Alex explained with the same clinical detachment Richard had once used when delivering difficult news to patients. Your recent publicity issues combined with the Neuropulse's regulatory challenges made them receptive to our offer. The Harrington name will remain, of course. It has historical significance in Boston healthcare. That evening, Richard stood at the window of his Beacon Hill penthouse, staring at the Charles River where everything had begun 15 years earlier. The glass of whiskey in his hand remained untouched as he confronted the full magnitude of his error. He hadn't merely lost a family. He had rejected an empire, a legacy, and the only people who shared his intellectual gifts. In Cambridge, Jessica hosted a small dinner at their home. Eleanor, now Healthbridge's director of research, raised her glass in a toast. To 15 remarkable years, from a basement laboratory to changing modern medicine. The triplets joined the toast enthusiastically, their faces animated as they discussed future projects. Ryan's NASA-endorsed monitoring system was entering advanced testing. Alex had drafted a proposal for a new AI division within Healthbridge. Ethan was collaborating with international researchers on communication systems for nonverbal patients. "Do you think he'll try to be part of our lives now?" Ryan asked suddenly, his perceptive nature always attuned to emotional undercurrents. Jessica considered the question carefully. What Richard never understood is that some opportunities occur only once. He lost the chance to be your father the moment he considered you an unacceptable burden rather than a gift. What you decide to do with that truth now is entirely your choice. "We don't need him," Alex stated with characteristic directness. "But perhaps we could learn from him professionally," Ethan suggested, always the diplomat. His surgical innovations were significant, despite his personal failings. Jessica smiled at their thoughtful responses. "You three will determine what relationship, if any, serves your best interests. I trust your judgment completely." As they continued their celebration, Jessica glanced at the framed photograph on the wall, herself holding 3 tiny premature infants, exhausted but determined, with Healthbridge's first patent certificate mounted beside it. The visual journey from that desperate beginning to their current success needed no commentary. In his empty penthouse, Richard Harrington finally understood that Jessica Reynolds had never needed his approval or assistance. She had needed only the freedom to prove what she had known all along, that she was more than sufficient to build a remarkable life, a groundbreaking company, and raise 3 extraordinary sons who would never doubt their worth the way she once had. While the 4 toasted to the future, that framed photograph on the wall captured their complete journey. Jessica holding 3 premature babies in her arms, exhausted but determined, with Healthbridge's first patent displayed alongside it. The final proof that she had always been more than enough. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.